Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, back with another Final Fantasy 16 video. I'm so sorry about these. I was like, maybe I should combine a bunch of these into one video, but I got to admit, a lot of these interviews are really substantial in terms of details, and that's probably just because we know so little about the game that every little out of context sentence looks like a gold mine of information. So this video, we're looking at the Gamespot interview on its own. The rest of them I think I can combine because the rest of them have very similar themes and whatnot, but I think I have to do this one standalone as well. So the title of this one over at Gamespot is Final Fantasy 16 is an ambitious, more mature entry in the series, says the producer. That would be Yoshi-P. Now, they cover quite a few topics in this. The beginning is all the fluff. You know, Final Fantasy franchise hasn't been what it is in quite some time, and Square Enix look to be making a lot of smart moves to ensure Final Fantasy continues to shine with the spotlight, talking about some of the Final Fantasy VII stuff. Moving on, though, of course, this one is about Final Fantasy 16. Talks about some of the staff that are working on it, though, and of course, Yoshi-P being the producer, talking about how he salvaged Final Fantasy 14, and now Final Fantasy 16 is something he is largely in charge of. So they get into a good bit of gameplay related talk right off the bat. How much of a gameplay factor are the big Titan battles we saw in the recent trailer? What's the ratio to those versus more recognizable Final Fantasy 15 like human combat? So Yoshi-P first starts by talking about how there's one Titan battle in the trailer that is a cutscene. That's Titan versus Shiva, the big one that we've seen in both the Awakening and Dominance trailers. But then he talks about how there's the actual icon battles themselves. He's been talking about that in a lot of the interviews, you know, and even what we see, that brief little snippet. He's like, it's you know, maybe it's only about a 20th of what you actually get to experience, that tiny little cutscene. I don't think he's saying that it's going to go from being a 1-second clip to a 20-second clip. I think you know what it means. In that trailer, the battle was Titan. The battle itself goes through many different stages, many different phases, and all of these change in real time. The player ends up experiencing something that is a large-scale, action-packed, and high-octane. Hopefully a lot of players will see that and think, I can't believe you created something that's so crazy. Again, that's just the battle of Titan. There are several other summon versus summon battles, and they are all unique from a gameplay perspective. For example, while one of these battles is reminiscent of a 3D shooting game, another feels like a pro wrestling match, while another, like the one with Titan, incorporates an entire area as the battlefield. You know what's funny? A wrestling match I would have assumed would have been Titan. I think 3D shooter is probably Bahamut. I can't imagine it really being anything like that. Maybe Garuda a little bit. Garuda, though, did kind of seem that way with her getting tossed around, but then she blasts Ifrit's arm off in the trailer, so that's not exactly very wrestling-like. And incorporates the entire area as a battlefield. That's probably referring to Titan's size, so he's probably like shaking up the ground, and it feels more like a substantial battle of his size and his grandeur against whatever you're playing as, probably Ifrit or something of that category. But they're going to be varied. They're going to all have very different themes associated with them. And again, what we saw in the trailer, there's a good example of those battles. The user interface you saw in there, again, it's showing that this is all in real time. However, that UI, we actually had to remove parts of it because there's spoilers for the story. Now I want to know what they removed. They could just be referring to the name of the giant thing that was like question mark, but they could have been other elements altogether that were missing there as well. We did want to show that these battles exist, and Clive controls one of the summons, and have these summons versus some in battle. Talked a lot about the icon versus icon battles. There's different types of battles as well. A lot of the battles Clive will face just while journeying around will be smaller scale, fight some small enemies, waves of enemies, meet elite enemies, mini bosses, and finally bosses themselves. And Clive, in his human form, will even have to contend with some full-size icons himself. I actually was hoping that was going to be the case, so I'm glad to hear them confirm that. You've also had a lot of pressure from the development team because of the expectations of what they want from a game. To tell you the truth, no one should ever tackle 2 Final Fantasy games at once like I did. So that's a quote from later in the actual interview itself. Which previous Final Fantasy games would you like in this game too? And how has 14 served as a source of inspiration? Kind of a leading question, but that's all fine. The game will be focusing heavily on action featuring these real-time battles, something on a massive scale, things that in the series hasn't really fully explored. 16 on it feeling like a new experience, unlike a lot of the past Final Fantasies. So it will still have that look and feel of Final Fantasy, but it'll be different. One thing we did kind of serve as a source of inspiration, at least for summons, was in Final Fantasy 14. The story there and the game design also put a lot of emphasis on how we portrayed the summons, known as the primals. So if players see some of those influences 16, and in how they're portrayed and how they appear in game. I think we all kind of see that. You know, we do see Titan really looks more like his Final Fantasy 15 counterpart, But Garuda definitely gives me Final Fantasy 14 vibes, but like cranked up a little bit. Ifrit being a little bit more regal. You know, Phoenix is Phoenix, but even that you can kind of see it. So I get what he's saying about that to some degree, but I do still kind of see them not as direct 14, other than Garuda. Garuda really, really reminds me of the Final Fantasy 14 counterpart. 15 was very conscious about male friendships and masculinity. What overall theme is this game trying to express? One of the main themes explored in Final Fantasy XVI's narrative deals with the inevitable clash of values and ideals when you get multiple people with different ideals in the same room. What is right? What is wrong? Again, because we focus so much on their dominance and they have such a large part in the story, you're going to see how they think the world should be and what they think is right for the world. You're going to focus on these motivations and those struggles, and then you're going to delve even deeper into the darker themes when it comes to how people should live. Should people live the life that was chosen for them or fight to break free from some kind of destiny? The legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for far too long. Pretty straightforward. There's not really much to extrapolate from that. It backs up some of the things they've said in the other interviews regarding the themes. They're just making mention that it's just very different. It's not about the party so much as these overall ideals. So yeah, it's very individual thought driven, I suppose. Are they planning to support the world with tertiary lore material, or is it more self-contained? Oh boy, yeah. I guess somebody had to ask, right? Like, when's the movie? When's the book? When's the anime? Listen, I liked most of those things for 15, but yeah, it was a bit exhausting trying to keep up with it all. Currently, there are no plans to create anything, for example, like a lore book. I like how he thinks they mean the lore book. They are definitely, this question is definitely referring to all the stuff 15 and even 7 get. I mean, to be frank, a lot of Final Fantasy's franchises branch off into other platforms, even if it doesn't, you may not remember bits and pieces of it. I mean, even Final Fantasy X had that audio drama, so it's, I understand where they're coming from. Development team is currently working really hard to make the final release of the game a complete experience so that no other tertiary content will be required to enjoy or understand it. And so how the story and the narrative progresses is that we follow the life of Clive Rossville through 3 different stages. So I was wondering this. So we are going through 3 different stages of his life, his teens, his 20s, and his 30s, because in some clips in the trailer, he doesn't look like his oldest self, but he is clearly older than he is at the start of the game. So I was wondering if we were getting 3 different timelines with him or 3 different jumps in time throughout the adventure. Glad to note that what I noticed was kind of true. Because we're covering such a large amount of time, it's safe to say a lot will be happening in the background with regards to the state of the realm. While we have a few side quests available in the game that will touch upon what's going on in the world in the background, in addition to the main scenario, we will also have these in-game compendiums and a lot of stuff to read in-game to hopefully help provide a lot of lore to people who wish to delve deeper. Yeah, so basically everything's in the game. Now, obviously, people are going to be skeptical about that until it releases, even after it releases, let's be honest, but it's good to at least hear. It's being considered, it's being thought about, and currently there are no plans for any sort of third-party lore or anything like that. There was implied nudity in the recent trailer. It was very implied, and it was very nude. It's something you can say. So this seems to, I'm just glancing over it, this seems to be just going into, I guess, the rating system almost. Video game ratings have become much more restrictive recently regarding what can or cannot be shown. I do believe that ratings are important to ensure younger players, younger children are shielded from extreme material. On the other hand, when trying to tell a story with difficult adult themes, these ratings end up becoming somewhat of a hindrance. You find yourself changing things you want to do in the game based on that rating. You want it to show something, but because you have a certain rating that you need to go to, you need to move the camera away, and that ends up making the entire experience feel a little bit cheaper. And so this time, to make sure we could tell the story that we wanted to in the way we wanted to, we decided to pursue a mature rating in most of the regions that will be releasing the game. But again, this is not because we wanted to make the game more violent or more explicit. This is because we felt it was necessary to allow us to explore those more mature themes the game tackles. It's interesting because they say they pursued it. It's very interesting to hear that because over the years, it seemed like we hear more and more of the concessions that are made. I remember with Final Fantasy XIV, they really wanted to make sure they had the teen rating, for example. So when the Monster Hunter event came around, they made sure that it was not very explicit, the chopping off of Rathalos's tail. And it seemed like such a minor thing because it would, in Monster Hunter, it doesn't look like super visceral or anything like that. So we'd imagine that in 14, that wouldn't be an issue at all, but it was something they had to deliberately pursue. They wanted it to be more graphic than it was. Whereas here, they are actively pursuing to go whatever route they can to tell the right story. And I like that. Every time I feel like somebody goes for the rating they want, that is when you get the best storytelling and the most consistency, especially in the overall design of everything. Deadpool, great example of something a lot of people were afraid was going to go teen and made the mature rating, and it had to happen as far as I'm concerned. What is it like going from revitalizing an MMO to now being in charge of the next main entry in the franchise? That's something of a graduation. Or do you just feel like, hey, just another Final Fantasy game? I'm going to do my best. To tell the truth, to be in charge of the next mainline Final Fantasy, it's a lot of pressure. So you have the pressure from the fans who want a lot of different things. This is the quote from before. And I have a lot of different ideas about the direction the series should go in. You have that pressure of the history of Final Fantasy, it being a 35-year-old franchise, and having all that history there, the weight of the history. You also have a lot of pressure from the development team itself, because the dev team has expectations and what they want from the game. And so to tell you the truth, no one should ever tackle 2 Final Fantasy games at once like I did. Yeah, you crazy. Thankfully, you're not director on both of them, or you'd be having a much tougher life, Yoshi-P. The one thing, though, that is very different from 14 is that on 14, I'm producer and director. Luckily, on 16, I'm only a producer. A whole amount of pressure that comes to being a director is not on my shoulders. It's on the director's shoulders. In that sense, there's a bit less pressure on me. You know that when the company came to me and asked the development team to tackle the next Final Fantasy 16, I told them that we would do it as long as I didn't have to be director as well, because there was no way I could direct 2 projects of this scale at once. Yeah, it's a good idea. That said, being asked by the company to create the newest mainline Final Fantasy was an honor. It was an honor that was only made possible because what we were able to achieve in 14, the amount of feedback we've gotten from fans, the amount of support that we've had from fans and players and the media around the world. You guys supporting us, giving us the opportunity to make the next Final Fantasy. I like how every time it says the next Final Fantasy, it says Final Fantasy 16 right afterwards. And for that, we are very appreciative. Okay. And that is the last question in the Gamespot interview. You know what? I just remembered there's another interview that's super substantial that is almost certainly going to be its own video. I'm going to release this in the morning. It's like 10 after 11 right now. So I'm going to go to bed and release this in the morning, I think. But anyway, yeah, that's the Gamespot interview. And I've said it in the last 2, but hopefully you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe if you're looking for more 16 news. I'll be posting it whenever we get it. And like, favorite, subscribe, share. You know the drill. You've been around before. You've been on YouTube. Anyway, I'm going to go to bed. I'll see you all tomorrow or whenever you see this video. And until then, take care.